Command economy, market economy. This is chapter 2. We're in chapter 2 now. So the ideas of how an economy operates. Market economy is the market making decisions, individual consumers, individual businesses choosing what to do, what to sell, at what price. Consumers responding. And the back and forth between consumers and producers means that eventually we will get to a price point where everybody agrees, because a manufacturer who produces something and charges here, where the demand for it is here, that manufacturer is going to be out of business because nothing up here is going to sell. So they come up a little bit, they come down a little bit, boom, we have a meeting of the minds. The market economy, the market makes the decisions. The government is there and it kind of acts as a referee. And that's kind of the ideal situation, I guess. Adam Smith would have preferred in his laissez-faire approach that no government interference. But in that work and in later writings, he kind of did agree that the government could act as a referee in disputes only if the government didn't have a say or a skin in the game here, in the sense of a favorite or some monetary interest involved in either party. But the government has to set up the legal circumstances, the protections of IP and copyrights and incorporation to allow the businesses to form. And then they, like I said, then the consumers and the producers have this dance. But the command economy obviously is being directed by government. Now, don't make the assumption here, and a lot of students make the assumption early on in this class, that a command economy is totally communist. You could have a command economy that is fascist. If you look at what Hitler did, yes, there were private businesses in Germany in the 1930s, but they basically did what the government told them to do. And if the government paid them for it, even better, that they would go along with it. So BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen, all these companies in Germany were essentially going along with, but the commands came from Berlin. So you can have it on the extremes of either right or left. And the command economy deprives individual consumers and businesses from making their own decisions in a lot of circumstances, if not all circumstances. But the interesting point about this PowerPoint that we're talking about here, the transition of China, Mao dies in 1977, and there's a bit of a chaotic period. Mao's wife tries to take over the government, Gang of Four. But emerging from the background was an old communist who was branded as a subversive because he was pragmatic. So Deng Xiaoping gets that term pragmatist labeled to him during the Cultural Revolution time period, and he's put under house arrest, unlike some of the others who were exiled or killed, and then emerges in 1979-80 time period as the dominant force in liberating the Chinese economy and moving it from strict command economy to the modern power that it is today. But it's Deng Xiaoping's work here to transition. But you just can't snap your fingers and let it go. The discussion here is Russia post-Soviet collapse 1991 versus China post-Mao. The Russians essentially, with the breakup of the Soviet Union caused by the attempts of many of the republics to break away, Gorbachev was going to write a new constitution with only 8 of the 15 Soviet republics involved, if that. There was a coup conspiracy by the hardline communists to restore the strength and power of the Soviet Union over everybody, and that failed. Yeltsin stood up there, and then finally the Soviet Union kind of breaks apart. But by the end of 1991, it was almost like, Gorbachev handing off to Yeltsin. I think they did a speech on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day, 25th of December. And it was like, hey, it was fun while it lasted, guys, but you know what? You're on your own beginning tomorrow. And literally, Russia was on its own and nobody knew what to do. There was no direction, no government nursing it along or nurturing it along. It was just like, hey, now today you're democratic and capitalist. And the only people who had any inclinations of what capitalism was the black marketeers. That's why within the first decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you could have billionaires in Russia. How can you have billionaires in Russia? They don't even know capitalism. They did not transition. They just kind of snapped their fingers and boom. And it ended up being, the 1990s ended up being a very up and down period with a lot of corruption, a lot of wealth being concentrated into the oligarchs. The first wave of oligarchs, these are the ones pre-Putin. But China didn't do that. China transitioned and took steps, slow but sure steps along that way. So what we're going to do is going to look at that transition PowerPoint here. So we're going to share the screen, and again, away we go. All right, so to go from the communist system that was in place under Mao, which led to the Cultural Revolution and millions of people dying of starvation, China's in no shape to do anything, really. Now, obviously, they have a lot of labor, potential labor, almost 1 billion people at this time, but they don't have the technical skills and resources. And the help they got from the Soviet Union was scattered. Mao and Stalin didn't get along very well. I've read letters back and forth to each other, and it's like 20,000 word letters basically calling each other a bad communist. Khrushchev tried to, but then even then he got fed up with Mao and pulled all the Soviet help in the late 50s. So China has to do it on its own. Here we go. The first step you have to do with any kind of transition from a communist to a market economy, and this goes for Eastern Europe, the Soviet bloc countries. At least they had they had capitalism and democracy before, so they could just kind of refigure out, scratch their heads. Yes, that's how we do it. But for China, the first thing you got to do is you got to develop a private sector. You have to allow the individual entrepreneur to take the chances, the risks necessary to create businesses, to provide some legal protections, to provide access to bank financing. And China's not just going to turn capitalist all at once. The banks in this time period are controlled by the communist government, but they're learning how to do capitalism on the fly, but they're learning it slowly. They're sending some of their best and brightest to Western universities to come back in and learn how to do this. The one statistic that I think is the most telling is that there are more people in China, in communist China today, that speak English than in the United States total population. Why? Because English is an international business language. You've got to learn it. All right, so you see what you got here. Again, it may be oversimplified to put up a picture here of a lemonade stand, but that's where it starts. It's that kid who shovels sidewalks in his or shovels driveways and sidewalks in his neighborhood when it snows. Private sector, money, accumulation. Okay, so let the private sector develop. Small businesses first. Second, understanding this, and this is one of the big points that Deng Xiaoping made, was that, hey, guys, we can't do this on our own. We don't have the technical skills. We don't have the capital equipment. We've got old Soviet equipment here. We need better. But we don't want to go as far as to allow the foreigners to come in and totally dominate the landscape like they did during the imperialist period with the spheres of influence in China. Remember your world history. So what they did was to require foreign companies to get in there and develop joint ventures with domestic companies. Like they produce cars in China, and they were probably clunky. If you've ever seen a picture of an East German Trabant, kind of on that order. But if General Motors comes in there and partners up with the people who took over one of the Shanghai factories here, this is General Motors factory in Shanghai, work together. Technology can be then integrated and exchanged inside, and we get to see it, work it, use it. General Motors gets access to a marketplace. General Motors sells more cars in China than they do in the United States in the 1990s, early 2000s. Okay, well, in the 2000s, up until the 2008-9 crash, they were selling more cars in China than they were in the United States. Other foreign companies go in there too. Japanese companies go in there. Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen's also big in there. But you have to team up with locals to do it. All right, so you allow them access, you allow them factory space, you allow them to bring the technology in without taxing the hell out of it, and you allow them to have to recruit more labor, and you produce a car that either China can export or not. In most cases, the Chinese cars are not exported because China has a voracious appetite for cars, and they're building highways like crazy there. But you have to encourage what they call foreign direct investment, FDI, foreign direct investment. Comes, and this technology then gets transferred over there, and then the Chinese can imitate and rebuild or reverse engineer it to suit their needs elsewhere. But that's the second major point, and this is what Deng Xiaoping is allowing slowly but surely. Third, this is part of this plan is to bring the foreigners in, is to create special economic zones like Shenzhen, which is just across the border from Hong Kong. Shenzhen in the 1960s and 70s was a village like, size of New Brunswick, maybe 20,000 people. It's now a 15 million person city. And they demolished it, relocated it, demolished it, and built it from the ground up. So if you think about urban planning, and you think about the ability to build a business city from the ground up, not retrofitting an old city like Shanghai, but to build it from the ground up, put the factories here, put the railroads through here, put the electric power station over here, put the housing over here, public transportation facilities there. Let's put this here, let's move this here, let's make shopping district, restaurants, entertainment here for the business people, boom. And everything is built up, brand new, modern, and it works. You know, technology in terms of communications, landlines, hard lines, internet connections, all that kind of stuff. Plus the factories can go there, and that's where you go. And these zones are created to have special administrative rules. They're kind of operate on their own. Taxation, limited, lowered, access to capital, certainly. But most of the products in these zones are designated to go out. So that's why if you look at this, this particular slide, you see the, you see that most of these zones are on the seacoast. They're not deep inside. You see them there. Now, A and B, A is Hong Kong, B is Macau. Macau was a Portuguese treaty port city that was returned to Chinese control in 1999. Hong Kong was returned by the British in 1997. Shenzhen is across from Hong Kong. You've got Zhuhai across from Macau. And you see the others there, the district in Shanghai. You see the other two along the coast, Shantou and Xiamen. They're there to also, again, produce for export, all right, for export. Again, here's some more of the rules. You can you can pause the video to see the rules here. But again, these are kind of operating under different set of circumstances than the rest of China. Pause it if you need to. Okay, the third major point here is to get rid of the state-owned enterprises. You know, state-run companies. And again, there's an example here that works in Brazil when they sold off Telebras, the phone company. You know, the Brazil government made a lot of money, plus they got a lot better service because all the foreign companies came in and invested in the tech for this Brazilian market. Remember, Brazil is the 5th largest by size and 5th largest by population country in the world. But in this case, China has to get rid of all their state-run companies, which are hemorrhaging money. They're inefficient. They don't work well. They're not making profit. And so if you bring a foreign business owner in to own the company, take that company over, they're going to cut fat. They're going to cut the political jobs that were patronage jobs. They're going to bring in the technology. They're going to make it run right, and they're going to make a profit on it. And they're going to try to make a profit on it. And the government gets some money from the sale of it that they can then spin, as the Brazilian government did. The Brazilian government thought they would make about $9 billion from the sale of Telebras in 1998-99, and they made $20 billion. So it's money that you can then circulate back in and do some more good work. But you got to get rid of these dinosaurs. Okay, these dinosaurs deserve to have died because they were just not. I mean, you're talking about using 1950s Soviet equipment, which isn't good to begin with, and now it's 30 years old on top of it, and it's inefficient, yet the Americans or the Germans can bring in lots of high-tech new stuff, and voila, you're making steel, you know, twice as good as quality steel at half the price. And you start the idea of profit and competition, and you bring about those kind of market forces there, but this is the government getting out of the way. Now, we don't have that kind of experience here. I mean, obviously the post office is there, but the post office is in the Constitution, so it's got to be there. But you also have the, you know, like Amtrak is the only kind of government entity that's really a business. But the government's not going to be involved in making cars or televisions or shampoo. You know, get out of the way. Let somebody else do it. Let even an internal Chinese businessman who's got some money or some backing or some partners to buy that shampoo company and let them turn it around and make the good stuff. You know, so all of these state companies, and believe me, you know, you think about a communist country particularly, all these companies, all those factories are state run. The Chinese government's just selling them off, and they don't have to run them anymore. They don't have the burden of providing a wage and benefits for these people. It's the private companies doing. And yeah, you can get into the sweatshop argument here, but that's for another day. All right, so the political consequences here, and this is kind of more of a world history perspective than it would be for us, but did the taste of freedom in capitalism and in the economy lead in 1989, less than a decade since Deng Xiaoping was working these economic reforms, to the Tiananmen Square riots and protests. And again, you got the two main symbols of that. First, the guy who stood down a line of tanks for about 15 minutes. Looks like a white-collar worker type. He has his briefcase, his white shirt on, and you know he's just basically yelling at the tank commander for about 10 minutes until his friends got him out of there, because they were then going to run them over. And the goddess of democracy there, facing Mao in the Tiananmen Square, facing the Forbidden City, in the portrait of Mao, looking like, like up yours. And that's, that's when the government had to come in. You knew the protests were there. If they just would have not done this, because this is a direct kind of affront to Mao, the way it's facing and the way it looks like the the goddess of democracy is the Statue of Liberty. This is too far. So, but did that lead to it? It did, perhaps, but what has come out of this? Now you've got a more repressive Chinese government now cracking down on Hong Kong. Hong Kong protests have broken out, but, here we are a generation later, and we then have to ask the question, if your wallet's fat, do you care really about politics? If your wallet's fat, do you really care how the country's running? Does it bother you? Yeah, really? No? Okay. And Bill O'Reilly had that comment, the Fox News commentator, years ago after the Benghazi situation with our ambassador in Libya, and complaining when he did a man on the street interview with like 20 different people, and 19 of them knew absolutely nothing about what went on. He's like, we could be invaded by Albania, and as long as we've got bars, as long as we've got our service, or wireless service, we're fine, right? We don't care. And that could be true. As long as your wallet's fat, you don't care. Again, Hong Kong, that special circumstance. Again, the island of Hong Kong here, the Hong Kong island on the map and the surrounding islands there, Lantau Island, those are what were given to the British in 1842 after the Opium Wars. And then after successive problems, they kind of got into the Kowloon Peninsula and the new territories. Now, the new territories in Kowloon were on a lease, a 99-year lease that was signed in 1898, 99, 1900 time period. So those would have expired at the end of the 20th century. So that's why the British were kind of in negotiations to turn it over, hopefully preserving Hong Kong's economic freedoms and democracy there. But that was the idea. And then Macau later. Macau, though, interestingly enough, the Portuguese treaty port, Macau is the only place in China where casino gambling is allowed. And the gambling outfits in Macau, they're actually building landfill to make more land for them into the bay there. The gambling outfits in Macau do more business than all the casinos in Las Vegas. Think about that for a second. All right, one of the economic development projects here, when you talk about trying to get your country moving forward, is electric power. Obviously, those of you who have come from the old country, and I've talked to many Indian students and Pakistani students about this particularly, the power grid is not reliable. Except in the biggest cities like Bangalore, in the computer district, obviously would be one they have that. But most places the power grid is not reliable. Well, China has an issue, especially with electric power. They're using a lot of coal, and they're suffering thousands of mining deaths a year because of that. But their idea to build a humongous dam that's like 7 times the size of Hoover Dam, if you've been to Hoover Dam outside of Vegas, 7 times the size, and to think about how to dam up the Yangtze River, which is one of the wildest rivers. After it's heavy rain, it can go 40 feet level changes in a day. And the idea of building this dam in an area and then having to relocate 2 to 3 million people and to build it. And you can see the before and after pictures of the river there. You can see the artificial reservoir created behind it. You see the map of where it is. Pause it if you want. I'm going to move on. It's a construction project here that's going on, and the old geography books that I used to use when I first started teaching here as part of the world history class was talking about this as a project that was just being kind of put on the board. The construction hadn't started yet, but China is going to commit billions and billions of dollars to this. At one point in time, and I had a student whose father was an architect engineer, and their company did a lot of business in China, and he said that, and this was probably the late 90s, that 80% of the world's heavy construction equipment was in China, building stuff in China. And, you can just see by the picture here. Okay, a little more of a completed picture of this dam. You can see the waterway here where my cursor is. That's where the ships go up, and there's docks and locks here to take it. And this is the power generation station. Some statistics. I think the interesting most on here is that at full capacity, this power plant can supply enough power to central China that equals 15 nuclear power plants. Now, we had 4 in New Jersey, 4 nuclear power plants in New Jersey. We have 3 operating now. The one closer to the Atlantic shore in Forked River closed down last year decommissioned. Not anything problem, just time's up, And the 15 nuclear power plants is just, it's like, wow, that much electricity needs to be generated there. But of course, there's always going to be problems, and here are some of the problems. You can again pause it if you wish to look at some of the negative consequences here. And again, talking about China being able to leapfrog it, you can see gross domestic product that China languished. I mean, China was a third world country in the 80s and 90s. It's starting to pick up, and you can see, but since 2000, how dramatic that has been. And again, the further you go away from Tiananmen Square, the massacre there, and the suppression of the protests in Hong Kong, the more you forget about these kind of things, that China is just supplying us with everything that we need that's cheap. Apple makes their iPhones in China. They contract out with a Taiwanese company that goes into China, Foxconn, and makes it. But, take a look at the labels. Take a look at anything you buy. Where is it made? Do we, but again, we have a choice here. And again, we talk about choices and production possibilities in the first chapter. Do we really want all those smokestacks? I mean, would you want a smokestack industry going up in East Brunswick and opening your door? And those of you who lived along Route 18, every once in a while, you can open your door and you can smell the dump, the Edgeboro dump. Can you imagine smelling imagine what Pittsburgh would have been like, that Pittsburgh area in 1900, all those steel mills. How great that air would have been to smell. So again, it's choices. And we talk about should, and that goes into the normative economics as opposed to positive economics. Decisions that were made. Should we really not do smokestack stuff? Well, that's what it is. All right, so I'm done. FAQ page for chapter 2 concerned anything concerning chapter 2. Please put your comments there, and we'll move on to the next topic.